Captain Jake Morrison wiped sweat from his forehead as he stared at the massive alien ship through the bridge window. 3 months they had been traveling through space, following strange energy signals that seemed to come from nowhere. Now he wished they had never found the source. The alien vessel was huge. It looked like someone had taken a normal spaceship and made it 3 times bigger, then covered it with something that looked like black oil. The surface moved and twisted like it was alive. Jake had seen many strange things in his 20 years of space travel, but nothing like this. "Captain, I'm getting something on the radio," said Lisa Park, the communications officer. Her voice shook as she spoke. "It's not like any language I've ever heard before." The sounds coming through the speakers made everyone on the bridge feel sick. They were deep and harsh, like an animal growling mixed with metal scraping against metal. The ship's computer tried to translate the sounds, but it kept making error noises. Commander Tony Blake moved closer to Jake. "Should we try to send a message back? Maybe they're just saying hello." Jake was about to answer when the alien ship fired something at them. A bright blue beam shot past their ship, missing them by only a few hundred feet. The blast was so powerful it lit up the darkness of space like lightning. "That was a warning shot," said Jake. "Everyone to battle stations now." The crew moved quickly to their positions. Amy Rodriguez, the chief engineer, started working on the ship's defenses. Her fingers flew over the control panel as she tried to get their shields working at full power. Then the alien voice came through the speakers again. This time the computer managed to translate most of it. The voice was cold and cruel, like someone who enjoyed hurting others. "Small species found. Give up now or we will destroy you. Fighting us is useless. The Zephyrian Empire has won against everyone." Jake felt his blood turn cold. These aliens called themselves Zephyrians and they were talking about an empire. That meant there were many more of them somewhere out there. Lisa looked up from her station with wide eyes. "Captain, I'm reading their ship's power levels. Their weapons are 50 times stronger than ours. If they wanted to destroy us, they could do it in seconds." Tony grabbed Jake's arm. "We need to get out of here. Our ship is fast. Maybe we can outrun them." But Jake was studying the alien ship carefully. Something about the way it moved told him they wouldn't be able to escape. These beings had been hunting other species for a long time. They knew all the tricks. Amy called out from her station. "Captain, our computer has been analyzing their technology during this whole conversation. You need to see this." Jake walked over to Amy's station and looked at the screen. What he saw made his heart sink. The computer had detected weapon systems that could destroy entire planets. It had found evidence of thousands of ships just like this one. The Zephyrians were not just raiders or pirates. They were conquerors who had been taking over worlds for hundreds of years. "How many species have they conquered?" Jake asked. Amy's voice was barely a whisper. "According to our scans, at least 47 different civilizations. Captain, these beings don't just defeat their enemies. They turn them into slaves." The alien voice came through the speakers again. "You have one of your hours to decide. Surrender and become our property or die. Choose now." Jake looked around at his crew. Lisa was trying not to cry. Tony was checking and rechecking their weapons, even though everyone knew they were useless against the alien ship. Amy was still working on the computer, trying to find some weakness in the enemy ship. These were good people. They had families back on Earth. Children who were waiting for their parents to come home. Jake thought about his own daughter, Emma. She was only 8 years old. What would happen to her if he never returned? But as Jake stood there, something else started growing inside him. Something that had been passed down through thousands of years of human history. His ancestors had faced impossible odds before. They had stood against enemies who seemed unbeatable, and they had never ever given up. "Lisa, open a channel to their ship," Jake said. "Captain, what are you going to tell them?" Tony asked. Jake stood up straight and looked directly at the alien ship. "I'm going to tell them something they need to hear." The channel opened. Jake could feel the cold attention of the alien beings focusing on him. When he spoke, his voice was calm and clear. "This is Captain Jake Morrison of the human exploration ship Horizon. We have received your demands. Here is our answer. Humanity does not surrender. We do not become slaves. If you want us, you will have to come and take us. Good luck with that." He nodded to Lisa, who closed the channel. The bridge was silent for a moment. Then Tony laughed, but it was not a happy sound. Jake, do you realize what you just did? You just declared war on an empire that has conquered 47 species. Jake smiled, and for the first time since seeing the alien ship, he felt completely calm. Tony, those other species probably tried to negotiate. They probably tried to find a peaceful solution. But there's something these aliens don't understand about humans. What's that? Amy asked. When someone tries to make us extinct, we don't just fight back. We fight until either we're dead or they are, and we're very, very hard to kill. On the alien ship, the Zephyrian commander was laughing. In all his years of conquest, no species had ever refused his demands. These humans were obviously too stupid to understand how outmatched they were. He would enjoy crushing them slowly. He had no idea that he had just made the biggest mistake in the history of his empire. Admiral Pete Collins was drinking his morning coffee when the emergency alarm started screaming through his office. He had been in the military for 30 years, but he had never heard the alarm that meant humanity was facing extinction. His hands shook as he put down his cup and ran to the command center. The message from Captain Morrison's ship was short and terrifying. An alien empire called the Zephyrians had found them. These aliens had conquered 47 other species, and now they wanted to make humans their slaves. Morrison had refused to surrender and was asking for backup. Within 2 hours, every important leader on Earth was sitting in the emergency meeting room. Pete looked around the table at faces he had known for years. These were smart people who had solved problems that seemed impossible, but today they all looked scared. Dr. Helen Carter was the first to speak. She was the best scientist they had for studying alien life, even though she had never seen a real alien before today. She had been reading Morrison's reports about the Zephyrian ship and their weapons. "Gentlemen and ladies, we are in serious trouble," Helen said. "These aliens have technology that is hundreds of years ahead of ours. Their weapons can destroy entire planets. They have been conquering other species for thousands of years." General Rick Turner slammed his fist on the table. "So what do we do? Do we surrender? Do we run away and hide?" Helen looked at Rick with a strange expression on her face. "General, I don't think you understand what Morrison did out there. When the aliens demanded surrender, he told them no. Do you know what that means?" "It means he's brave," Rick said. "No," Helen replied. "It means he's human." She stood up and walked to the big screen on the wall. With a few button presses, she brought up files that most people in the room had never seen before. They were psychological studies of human behavior during wars and disasters. "I have been studying humans for 20 years, Helen said. "Not aliens, humans. Do you want to know what makes us different from every other species on Earth?" Lieutenant Colonel Susan Hayes leaned forward. "What do you mean?" Helen clicked to the next page. It showed pictures from old wars throughout human history. Battles that happened thousands of years ago and fights that happened just decades ago. All of them showed the same thing: humans who refused to give up even when they were clearly going to lose. "Every animal on Earth has the same response when faced with a predator that is bigger and stronger," Helen explained. "They either fight, run away, or freeze, but humans do something else. When we are pushed to the edge, when someone tries to wipe us out completely, we become something else." Pete was starting to understand. "What do we become?" "We become the most dangerous thing in the universe," Helen said. "We become humans who have nothing left to lose." She clicked to another page. This one showed studies of human wars where one side was much stronger than the other. In every case, the weaker humans had found ways to win that no one expected. They used tricks, traps, and tactics that seemed crazy until they worked. Rick was reading the files with growing amazement. "These reports show that humans will fight even when they know they're going to die. Why would we do that?" Helen smiled, but it was not a happy smile. "Because we would rather die fighting than live as slaves. This is not something we choose to do, General. This is something built into our DNA after millions of years of evolution." She brought up more files. These ones showed what happened to human enemies throughout history. Armies that had attacked human cities. Countries that had tried to conquer human lands. Species of animals that had hunted humans. "Where are they now?" Helen asked. Susan looked through the files. "Most of them are extinct. The ones that aren't extinct learned to stay away from us." "Exactly," Helen said. "Humans don't just defend themselves. When something tries to destroy us, we make sure it can never threaten us again. We hunt our enemies until there are none left. Pete was beginning to understand why Helen looked both scared and excited. Are you saying that Morrison's response was normal? I'm saying that Morrison's response was the most human thing he could have done, Helen replied. The Zephyrians think they are dealing with just another weak species that will beg for mercy. They have no idea what they just started. Rick stood up and walked to the window. Outside, he could see normal people going about their daily lives. They had no idea that aliens existed, let alone that those aliens wanted to enslave them all. So what happens now? Rick asked. Helen was already packing up her files. Now we show these Zephyrians why 47 other species couldn't stop them, but why they should have never, ever threatened humanity. Pete activated the emergency military protocols. Within hours, every human military base would be working on one goal, making sure the Zephyrian Empire regretted the day they found Earth. As the meeting ended, Pete thought about something his grandfather had told him years ago. His grandfather had fought in one of Earth's great wars, back when humans still fought against each other. Boy, his grandfather had said, there are two types of creatures in this universe. Those that know better than to corner a human, and those that are about to learn why they should have. The Zephyrians were about to get a very painful education. Captain Jake Morrison had been hiding his ship behind a large asteroid for 3 weeks, watching and learning. The first Zephyrian attack fleet had arrived expecting an easy fight. Instead, they found empty space where they thought Earth's defenses would be waiting for them. Jake smiled as he watched the alien ship search for his vessel. The Zephyrians were used to fighting species that met them head-on in big space battles. They had no idea how to fight an enemy that refused to play by their rules. Paul Martinez, his science officer, had been working day and night to understand the alien technology. Paul was a quiet man who loved solving puzzles, and the Zephyrian ships were the biggest puzzle he had ever seen. "Captain, I think I found something," Paul said, his voice excited for the first time in weeks. "Their shields work on a rotating frequency. Every 12 minutes, there's a gap in their protection that lasts for exactly 4 seconds. Nina Thompson, the weapons specialist, looked up from her station. Nina had grown up hunting with her father in the mountains of Colorado. She understood patience and waiting for the perfect shot. 4 seconds isn't much time, Nina said, but if we can hit them with everything we have during that gap, we might actually hurt them. Jake nodded. This was exactly the kind of information he needed. The Zephyrians thought humans were primitive because their ships were smaller and their weapons were weaker. They didn't understand that humans had been fighting smarter, not harder, for thousands of years. The alien fleet commander was getting frustrated. For 3 weeks, he had been searching for the human ship with no success. His name was War Leader Krex, and he had conquered 15 species without losing a single battle. These humans were starting to make him look foolish. "Search every asteroid, every piece of space debris," Krex ordered his officers. "One small human ship cannot hide from the mighty Zephyrian fleet forever." But Jake Morrison was not just hiding. He was setting a trap. He had been studying how the Zephyrian ships moved and communicated. Paul had discovered that they used a central command ship to coordinate their attacks. If that ship was destroyed, the other ships would be confused and unable to work together. Jake also noticed something else. The Zephyrians always kept their most important ships in the back, safe from danger. They sent their smaller ships forward to do the fighting. This was smart tactics against most enemies, but it gave Jake an idea. "Nina, how much damage could we do if we rammed our ship into their command vessel at full speed?" Jake asked. Nina calculated quickly. "If we hit them during the shield gap, and if we overload our engines right before impact, we could probably destroy both ships." "That means we all die," said Tony Blake, the commander. "There's no coming back from a ramming attack." Jake looked at his crew. These people had become like family to him over the years. The thought of asking them to die was almost too much to bear. But then he thought about what would happen to Earth if the Zephyrians won. He thought about all the other species that had been enslaved. "I'm not ordering anyone to stay," Jake said. "We have escape pods. Anyone who wants to leave can go now, and I won't think less of them." Nobody moved. Lisa Park spoke for all of them. "Captain, we knew this might happen when we signed up for deep space exploration." Besides, if we're going to die, let's make sure these aliens remember us. The attack came at dawn, Earth time. Jake had sent a message to the Zephyrian fleet, telling them he was ready to surrender. When the alien ships moved in close to capture him, that's when the trap was sprung. The human ship came out from behind the asteroid at full speed, aimed directly at the Zephyrian command vessel. War leader Krex had just enough time to realize what was happening before Nina's weapons tore through his ship's shields during the 4-second gap. The explosion was visible from 3 star systems away. When the light faded, both ships were gone. But the trap was not finished. Jake had sent copies of all of Paul's research to every human ship in the area. While the Zephyrian fleet was confused and leaderless, human ships attacked from all directions. They used the 4-second shield gap to destroy ship after ship. The battle lasted 14 hours. When it was over, only 3 Zephyrian ships escaped to tell their empire what had happened. The space around the asteroid field was filled with the wreckage of ships that had seemed unbeatable. Back on Earth, Admiral Pete Collins received the battle reports with amazement. The first human victory against the Zephyrians had cost them Jake Morrison and his entire crew, but it had also taught the aliens something important. Humans did not fight like other species. The surviving Zephyrian officers sent desperate messages back to their empire. "The humans are insane," one report said. "They use their own ships as weapons. They never retreat, even when they are clearly defeated. They fight like the demons from our oldest nightmares." General Rick Turner was already planning the next phase of the war. Human engineers were working around the clock to build new ships and weapons. But more importantly, they were studying the Zephyrian technology that had been recovered from the wreckage. Dr. Helen Carter was right. When humans were pushed to the edge of extinction, they became something else. They became the most dangerous enemy the Zephyrian Empire had ever faced. War leader Krex had been the best military commander in the Zephyrian fleet. He had never lost a battle in 40 years of conquest. His death was a shock to the entire empire. But for humans, it was just the beginning. Emperor Vexter stood in his throne room, staring at the reports from the human battle zone. In 3,000 years of ruling the Zephyrian Empire, he had never seen anything like this. One small human ship had destroyed an entire attack fleet by using tactics that seemed impossible. His generals were afraid. Vexter could see it in their eyes. For the first time in the Empire's history, they had met an enemy that fought back in ways they didn't understand. The humans didn't just defend themselves. They attacked like wild animals that had been cornered. "My Emperor," said General Thakron, his voice shaking slightly. "Perhaps we should reconsider our approach to these humans. They are more dangerous than we thought." Vexter's anger exploded through the room. "Are you suggesting that the mighty Zephyrian Empire should fear a species that doesn't even control their own star system? We have conquered 47 civilizations. We will not be stopped by primitive apes who barely know how to fly between planets." But privately, Vexter was worried. The human victory had sent shock waves through his empire. Other conquered species were starting to whisper about rebellion. If the humans could defeat Zephyrian fleets, maybe freedom was possible. "Bring me the planet killers," Vexter ordered. "If these humans want to play war games, we will show them what real power looks like." The planet killers were weapons that the Zephyrians had built to destroy worlds that refused to surrender. They were massive ships that carried beams powerful enough to burn the surface off an entire planet in minutes. Vexter had used them only twice before, and both times the site had made other species surrender immediately. Meanwhile, on the human colony world of New Haven, Mike Foster was having dinner with his family when the emergency siren started screaming. Mike worked for the Colonial Communications Department, and he recognized the specific pattern of the alarm. It meant incoming attack from space. Mike's wife Sarah grabbed their 2 children and ran for the underground shelters. Mike ran to the communications center to help coordinate the evacuation. But when he saw the size of the alien ship approaching their planet, he knew there would be no evacuation. The Zephyrian planet killer was bigger than anything humans had ever built. It was shaped like a giant sword, and it moved through space with the slow confidence of something that had never been defeated. Mike managed to send out one last message before the beam hit New Haven. "This is New Haven Colony to all human ships. We are under attack by a planet-killer weapon. Tell Earth what happened here. Tell them to make these monsters pay for what they're about to do to us." The beam that hit New Haven was brighter than 1,000 suns. It turned the entire planet's surface into melted rock and burning gas in less than 10 minutes. 2 million people died without even having time to scream. The Zephyrians broadcast the destruction across the galaxy. Emperor Vexter himself appeared on the transmission, speaking directly to humanity. "This is what happens to species that resist the Zephyrian Empire," he said. "Surrender now, or every human world will burn just like this one. You have proven you can destroy our ships, but can you stop us from killing everyone you love?" On Earth, Admiral Pete Collins watched the footage of New Haven's destruction with tears in his eyes. He had friends on that colony. Good people who had never hurt anyone were now dead because humanity had refused to surrender. General Rick Turner expected Pete to call for negotiations. Most species would have given up after seeing an entire world destroyed. But as Rick watched Pete's face, he saw something that made him step back in fear. Pete wasn't broken by the genocide. He was angry. Not just angry, but filled with a cold rage that Rick had never seen before. "General," Pete said in a voice that was perfectly calm, "activate Operation Scorched Earth. Authorization code Alpha 779. Rick's blood turned cold. Operation Scorched Earth was a plan that had been created during Earth's darkest wars, then locked away because it was considered too horrible to ever use. It was designed for situations where humanity faced complete extinction and had nothing left to lose. "Sir, are you sure about this?" Rick asked. "Once we activate those protocols, there's no going back. We'll be crossing lines that we swore we'd never cross." Pete turned to look at Rick, and Rick saw something in the Admiral's eyes that scared him more than any alien weapon. "General, they just murdered 2 million civilians to make a point. They think that will make us surrender. Instead, they just taught us that we can't let any of them survive." Dr. Helen Carter was called to an emergency meeting that same day. When she arrived, she found scientists and military officers working on projects that made her feel sick. They were developing weapons specifically designed to kill Zephyrians, not just their ships or their technology, but them as living beings. "Helen," said Dr. Kevin Wright, a biochemist who usually worked on medicines to help people, "we need you to help us understand Zephyrian biology. We're going to create viruses that will target their nervous systems." Helen stared at him. "Kevin, what you're talking about is biological warfare. That's against every treaty we've ever signed." Kevin's face was hard as stone. "Helen, they just demonstrated that they're willing to exterminate us down to the last child. This isn't about treaties anymore. This is about survival." Across the galaxy, other species watched the destruction of New Haven with horror, but they also watched humanity's response with growing amazement. Instead of surrendering, the humans were preparing for a war that would make the Zephyrians wish they had never heard of Earth. The Zephyrian Empire had ruled through fear for thousands of years. They had always won because other species were afraid to die. But they had just threatened a species that was more afraid of slavery than death. Emperor Vexter thought he had broken human resistance. Instead, he had just unleashed something that would hunt his people across the stars until none of them remained. Fleet Admiral Pete Collins stood on the bridge of the human warship Retribution, looking at the home world of the Zephyrian Empire. The planet below was where this war had started 18 months ago, when Emperor Vexter decided that humans would make good slaves. Now it would be where the war ended. The human fleet that surrounded the planet was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. These were not the small exploration ships that had first met the Zephyrians. These were weapons of war, built by a species that had learned to turn their enemies' own technology against them. Captain Julie Ross stood beside Pete, her face grim. She had led the ground forces that captured Zephyrian weapon factories. She had seen what the aliens did to their slaves, and it had made her understand why humanity could never let any of them survive. "Admiral, "We're receiving surrender requests from 17 different Zephyrian ships," reported communications officer Lisa Park. She had survived the destruction of 3 different human ships during the war. Each time she had been rescued and put on a new ship to continue the fight. Pete looked at the messages for a moment, then deleted them without reading them. No surrender, no prisoners, no mercy. The battle for the Zephyrian home world was not really a battle at all. It was an execution. The humans had learned every weakness in Zephyrian technology. They had built weapons that could tear through alien shields like paper. Most importantly, they fought with the desperate fury of a species that knew it was fighting for its very existence. Dr. Helen Carter watched from the science ship Vengeance as Zephyrian cities burned on the planet below. The biological weapons that Kevin Wright had designed were working perfectly. The virus spread through the alien population, shutting down their nervous systems one by one. Helen felt sick watching it happen, but she reminded herself of the footage from New Haven. 2 million humans had died in 10 minutes because Emperor Vexter wanted to make a point. Now his entire species was paying the price for that decision. The last Zephyrian ship tried to escape the battle by jumping to faster-than-light travel, but human engineering teams had been ready for that. They had built gravity mines that pulled ships out of hyperspace and destroyed them. There would be no survivors to carry word of what happened here. On the planet's surface, General Rick Turner led the final assault on the Imperial Palace. His soldiers moved through the empty streets like ghosts, checking every building for any remaining Zephyrians. They found only bodies. Emperor Vexter was discovered in his throne room, already dead from the virus. His last act had been to record a message that human soldiers found playing on repeat. In it, he begged for mercy and promised that the Zephyrians would never bother humanity again. "Too late for that," Rick said as he destroyed the recording device. Within 6 hours, the Zephyrian home world was silent. Every alien on the planet was dead. Every ship in orbit was destroyed. The species that had terrorized the galaxy for 3,000 years no longer existed. Pete received reports from human fleets across the former Zephyrian Empire. The story was the same everywhere. Alien colonies evacuated or destroyed. Slave camps liberated. Zephyrian technology captured or eliminated. But the most important reports came from the liberated species. Planets that had been enslaved for centuries were finally free. The humans had not just defeated their oppressors, they had erased them completely. Dr. Carter became Earth's first ambassador to the galactic community. Her job was to explain to other species what had happened and why. She found that most aliens understood, but they were also terrified. "We are grateful," said the representative from the Kelani species, who had been Zephyrian slaves for 800 years. "But we must ask, what would happen if our people ever threatened yours?" Helen's answer became famous throughout the galaxy. "We didn't want this war. We tried to avoid it. But when you threaten to make humanity extinct, you force us to show you why we survived when countless other species on our planet did not. We are what evolution creates when death is the only alternative to victory." As the human fleet returned to Earth, they carried with them the knowledge that they had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. The galaxy was safer now, but humanity had paid a terrible price for that safety. Captain Julie Ross, now promoted to Admiral, stood in her cabin looking at photos of New Haven before it was destroyed. Children playing in parks, families having picnics. Normal people living normal lives until an alien empire decided they didn't deserve to exist. She thought about the Zephyrian children who had died from the virus. They had been innocent, but their parents' empire had made it impossible to spare them. When fighting for survival, humans could not afford to leave any enemies alive to seek revenge later. Pete Collins retired from the military after the war ended. He spent his remaining years writing about what humanity had learned during the conflict. His most famous quote was carved into a monument on Earth. "We are not proud of what we became. We are only grateful that we survived to become it." The other species in the galaxy established new laws after witnessing humanity's response to the Zephyrian threat. No species would ever again threaten another with complete extinction. They had seen what happened when humans were forced to choose between slavery and death, and they never wanted to see it again. The Zephyrian Empire was gone, but the legend of humanity's response lived on. When young aliens learned about galactic history, they were taught a simple lesson. Some fights are better left unpicked, especially when your opponent is willing to sacrifice everything to ensure you never threaten anyone again. Humanity had won, but they would carry the memory of what they had done forever.